When your values and job are out of sync, it's only a matter of time before frustration sets in. You'll start questioning leadership, avoiding conversations, or just not caring. The longer you ignore it, the harder it's going to hit you. Let's talk about what to do when the disconnect and misalignment with your values is real. Welcome to Control Your Career. My name is Julia Toothacre, your strategic career consultant, and I'm so glad that you're here. This podcast is all about helping ambitious professionals control their career with clarity and confidence. This season, we are working through real, messy career challenges that come up in your career. Things like burnout, being overlooked, and career transitions. I'm walking you through how to handle each of these situations using my Control Your Career process, which is also the foundation for the book that I'm writing. Yes, I'm writing a book. I can't even believe that this is something that we're talking about, but it's here and we're doing it. If you're someone who wants to make intentional moves in your career, this process will help you do that in a clear and practical way. And today's topic is a big one. What to do when your job no longer aligns with your values. And honestly, it isn't always this loud and obvious thing that you see. Sometimes misalignment can show up very quietly. You just stop caring. I feel like some of us have felt that in the last couple of years. You feel uneasy during decisions. You can't stand the way that people talk to each other. You do the work, but your heart really isn't in it. And you start asking yourself, what am I doing here? We're talking about what happens when the way you work and the way your company works starts to clash, and how to handle it without blowing everything up. Let's get into it. So what does a values misalignment look like? So one thing I want to make clear is this isn't always a toxic workplace situation, which is, I think, where we usually will attribute this to. It can happen in a good job, right? And what does a good job mean? It means that there's nothing necessarily wrong. The company might also be totally fine, but there's just a misalignment of your values, right? And it doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong or the company's done anything wrong, but something has changed. So it's possible that you have changed. That's usually what I see most commonly. So something has happened within your life that has shifted your values, but the culture of the organization has not changed. It has stayed the same, but now you view it in a different light. Maybe the company did shift direction. This can happen, especially for smaller organizations or startups. So it shifted, and now your priorities and your values that you have held no longer match theirs. I actually had this happen with a client of mine a few years ago, where the organization started to go in a different direction, and they really didn't like that direction. It conflicted with their values, and we worked to get that person out of that position and into something better that aligned with the values that they had. So this is not an uncommon thing that happens, but I would say more often than not, you are going to change before the organization does change. So some common signs to look for will be that you're doing work that conflicts with your ethics or integrity. A lot of times we know going into a position that there might be some conflicts, but sometimes it arises because, again, we change, we evolve as people, we learn new things, we experience life, and that can change our ethics and our integrity. Leadership might say one thing and do another. So maybe you loved leadership at one point, but they had some changes and now you don't really align, or they're not living up to the promises that they have talked about. You no longer feel proud about the company or the product. I find that this happens a lot. And I think this is just as people, we grow and we think that we want this one thing and we like what the company stands for and we, support the product and all of that. And then something happens, right? And I think that's very natural. And so you just don't feel connected to the work anymore. And I would say that for some people, that's not really a big deal, but for some, they want to be connected to the work that they do. So it really depends. And then also you feel emotionally disconnected to your work, even when things are going well. Now, I know that some people are really good at, having those boundaries of not bringing emotions into work and work is work, but not everybody is like that. A lot of my clients, they're very connected to the work that they do. And so when something shifts and it creates an emotional response for them, then they know that they need to do something with that. So I know for some of you, you're not going to understand that, and that's okay. This is for people where they do have an emotional connection to their work or their purpose, and they want to make sure that it aligns. And one thing that I want to make sure everybody understands is that this misalignment a lot of times is very subtle until it's not. And it can pop up and you start to think, whoa, where did this come from? But honestly, it's been there. There's been like little signs here and there, and now it finally kind of reached its boiling point for you. And in some cases, you might not even be able to explain it, but you can feel it. That's when, honestly, I see a lot of my clients is they know that something is off and they're not quite sure. And so we dig into that to figure out what is going on. And a lot of times there is a values misalignment because that person has changed in some way. So as you know, we are using the Control Your Career framework to look through all of these different career challenges, and today is no different. So we're going to be applying the framework, looking at the values misalignment for this episode. And in stage 1, we have realistic reality. And if you have been along with us on this journey, you know that realistic reality is looking at your situation really objectively and going, what is actually happening here? So it's taking the emotions that you're feeling, removing those as best you can, and looking at the truth of the situation. And so one of the core questions that we want to ask ourselves in this stage for this particular topic is, where is the misalignment actually happening and how bad is it? Because a lot of times we are having a reaction, right? We are reacting to different things, but those situations are not actually the core issue. And so you want to uncover for yourself what that core issue actually is. So what can we look at when it comes to values misalignment? Look at behaviors, decisions, situations that feel off. A lot of times that's where it starts. The organization has made a decision. It doesn't sit right with you. And that, leads to other things that feel misaligned. Look at change. A lot of time, if an organization or you are going through some kind of change, then you want to evaluate that. So for the organization, has leadership changed? Has the company's strategy changed? Has the structure changed? Like, what is going on there that might be the linchpin for this for you? And really think about, is this a you issue or is it a them issue, or is it a little bit of both? So if it's a you issue, is there an internal shift that has to be made? And so when you get to the root of the problem, then you can determine, is this me? Is it a big deal? And can I move past it? Or is it something external that really you have no control over and is going to continue to frustrate you as you keep going, right? And then you want to consider, are your needs being met? So instead of that external look at what's going on with the organization, what is happening with you? What are the things that you need that aren't happening, right? Are there boundaries being crossed? Are you not getting work that you wanted? There's a lot of things that can go into this, but you really want to look at, again, the internal for you and the external for the organization. More often than not, there is some kind of catalyst for this. And so likely for you as a professional, something happened in your life that changed how you viewed the work or changed how you want your work to be. So that can be a lot of different things. It could be, maybe you had a child, you are in a relationship, somebody passed away. That's what happened to me, right? So there are a lot of different things that can shift and change for you that then impacts how you view the work that you're doing and can create this values misalignment. But as I've stated, the organization can also change, and then there's a conflict there. So you want to really identify which one it is. Sometimes it can be both. So that's okay too if it is both. So one of the things I want to make sure you understand about this stage in particular with realistic reality and values alignment, you have to be able to name the misalignment. If we can't name it, then we can't do anything about it. We can't figure out what that core thing is to allow us to move forward. So along with figuring out that core piece, I also want you to ask yourself, what was the moment that made you go, I can't keep doing this? And then that's a really good place to start in terms of unraveling what this could be for you. So in stage 2, we have identity analysis. And so this is looking at your personality and your preferences. And I would imagine we would know at this point that we're going to focus on values for this. That is one of the key components of identity analysis. So what values matter most to you right now? And are they possible to reach in the environment that you're in, whether that's work or home? Likely we are talking about work, but sometimes the home life can get a little crazy. That creates a values misalignment that then impacts work. Okay. So some of the things that I want you to think about, what values have become non-negotiable for you in this season. So I see this happen specifically with my clients who have children. It's not always like that, but I feel like that's the group that has the biggest values misalignment that become non-negotiables because they want to be around for their family more. Are you expected to act in ways that contradict your core beliefs? So we all have kind of a core set of values and beliefs. I have a values assessment that I'll link into the blog post for this episode that you can go through. That's a really good starting point, but there are usually other values that you bring into it that you want to make sure that you articulate. And sometimes that can go against our beliefs. And a lot of times we hear beliefs and we think, oh, is it religious? Not necessarily. There are a lot of different belief systems. And so whatever that is for you, you have to figure out, right? So sometimes there are work environments that make us uncomfortable because we live our lives a certain way and the culture of that organization is different. And so that can create a values misalignment based on our core beliefs. One of the other things that I think is really key to understand is leadership. I feel like this is where I see a lot of misalignment with values. And so what leadership or team behaviors are really not jiving with your values? I think that is a really key component that I see a lot with my clients. And this usually happens when you get new leadership. So you have a new leader come in and their values, the way that they operate is very different from yours. And so you're trying to reconcile that with yourself, or you really aligned with the previous leaders and you're having a hard time aligning with the new leader. So definitely make sure you look at that and see if there's a misalignment there. And something else that I think is important to ask yourself is, can your values exist in this environment? Or are you trying to force them into a space that is not going to allow for them? That is very, very common, right? We are trying to essentially change a culture from within. Now, some people have the ability to do that given the position that you're in, but most people don't. And so if you're constantly fighting, if you're constantly trying to change culture, if you're constantly trying to push your values into an environment that is not welcoming them, that's a really big sign for you to take a step back and go, is this the right environment for me? And what would be a better environment? So one of the things that I want you to keep in mind when it comes to this identity analysis is that misalignment is going to hurt the most when we're ignoring the values that we say that we care about. That is going to hit us like deep down. And that's what makes it so hard. And so in this section, in this stage, you want to make sure that you can articulate what your current values are and, look at them alongside some of the reflection you've done in the position and the organization to see if it still lines up. And if it doesn't, then we're going into stage 3 and we're going to talk about our purpose-driven plan or look at our goals. Now, when we are goal setting here, it's going to look different. For most people, it's going to be a combination of this isn't the right role for me and I need to find another role. Or it's going to be, I need to figure out how to make this work in this situation that I'm in. So some people have the luxury of being able to switch positions or they're able to find a new position fairly easily in another organization. And I think that's great. For others, it's going to be harder to leave or it's going to take time to leave, right? This market's a little fussy right now. And so because of that, you're not necessarily going to be able to find a job within the next couple of weeks, right? You might if you have a really good network, but more often than not, it's going to take some time. And so when we think about those two options, we want to look at the different things that we are trying to figure out for each of them, right? And that's how we're going to set our goals. So if you want to look for a new position, you have a couple of options. You can look within your organization and because maybe you just need a new team, right? Maybe it is the manager or the team that you're on and you just want to get off of that team and work for somebody else. That's fine. And so it looks different than I want to leave this and go do something different, go do something completely different. I'm not going to break down all of these because it's going to take too much time, but here's what I want you to consider if you are making any kind of switch or change, either within an organization or if you decide to leave. So what do you need to support your values? Okay, so this is going to be unique for everyone because you're going to do the values assessment. You're going to get those non-negotiables, the top 3 to 5 values that are non-negotiables, and you're going to go, okay, can I get this in this organization if I switch teams? Or do I need to get this somewhere else? Do we have a fundamental, clash in values because of the organization itself, right? So identifying those values will help you set the goal of what to do next. So if you do want to stay and you feel like you can work through some of this, so you have to figure out for yourself, what do you need to be able to stay? Do you need a certain type of support? Do you need, maybe it's just a new project or something. Maybe you need to work on your mindset around it, right? Maybe it's a value that's really just not a big deal at the end of the day, but you recognize that there's a clash. And so we've got to do some reframing. So that's going to be more of an internal, situation for you that's not necessarily going to, involve other people, but it's going to be more of a mindset. How can I approach this in a different way? So those goals are always going to look different depending on the situation that you're in. That's why I always want you to go through stage 1 and 2 first. And then once you get to stage 3, it should be fairly clear for you to go, okay, yes, I see that this is the goal, that I need to work toward now, or this is the goal that I need to work toward now. So one of the things to remember when we're setting goals, especially with something like this, is you do not have to do a complete overhaul, burn the whole situation down, right? I know we are talking about switching positions as a possibility, but you can also do a lot of career management to be able to stay in the current position. Again, not knowing your individual situation, it's going to look different. But once you identify what's missing, then you can have those strategic conversations around, is this manageable or do I need to leave? Okay. Now remember, your big question in stage 3 is going to be, if I stayed in this job, what would have to change for it to feel aligned, for me to feel aligned in this work? So keep that in mind as you're going through stage 3. All right, stage 4 is taking action. We have to initiate action. And I know this is one of the hardest things because we go through all this reflection work, which is taking action to an extent. We set a goal and now we have to actually do something about it. And I find that this is where most people will struggle because now they're not just complaining, they're actually taking what they've learned and they're turning it into something. So we're not going to sit in that space of victimhood with this type of situation, right? We're going to look at it and go, I can make changes, and what changes am I going to make? So here's the thing I want you to remember in this stage. Values misalignment gets worse when it's ignored. So even if you go through the first 3 stages and you know it needs to be done and then you ignore it, it's going to eventually explode again, if it hasn't already. So you don't want to wait until it explodes on you, especially now that you do have some clarity around it. So we do not want to ignore this. So here are some actions to take. And this is kind of, separate from the goals. Obviously, if you have certain goals, there's going to be certain actions that you're going to want to align for that. But here are just some general actions that might work for the situation that you're in. You want to start naming the values conflict in small and honest ways. And this is really, an individual thing for you to do. You can talk to other people about it if it matters. So if it's something you need to talk to your manager about, then you want to bring it up. But you need to make sure that you have the right language and clarity to be able to do that. When things are feeling off, if you have a good relationship with a manager or a coworker, a trusted peer, or something like that, definitely talk to them, right? Because sometimes we just need to talk these things out. Sometimes we're creating a situation when a situation isn't there. And so you want to make sure that you are naming it and you are talking about it, especially with a manager, a good manager, because they can usually take a step back from the situation and go, oh, that's not what this was. So they can give you some context and clarity as well. Something else, and this is really important if you want to stay in the position, but there is still some misalignment there. Look at joining a professional group or some type of community around the type of work that you do or the industry that you're in that does align with your values. Because what that will do is it will remind you that there are people out there that think like you, that want the same things that you want. And you never know, that could even lead to a new opportunity. And then I think this action kind of works for everybody, depending on the severity of the misalignment, but set a timeline for evaluating whether things can shift or if it's time to move on. So if this is especially true if you have decided to stay and you're going to try to work through it, give yourself like 3 months, 6 months and do a reevaluation and go, do I still feel the same way? Am I still frustrated? What is going on? You got to give yourself time to work through some things before you totally just jump ship with it, right? So the one thing that I want you to understand in this particular section with taking action is you don't need to blow everything up. I think that's the main thing here. A lot of times when we get frustrated and we have that values misalignment, we want to quit. We want to do all these things. We don't need to blow anything up, okay? We need to start listening. We need to start being aware and looking at some of the minutia and things that are happening around us. And then we need to act on that. We need to look at what can we change? What is within our power to change? Or do we need to point something out? What makes the most sense for you in your situation? And then we've got stage 5, which is high impact habits. Now, if you've listened to other episodes, you know that sometimes this will be very similar because habits are something that we are building, and a lot of them in the career space are going to look the same, especially when we're dealing with challenges. So one of the things that I want to encourage you to think about in this section is, how do you keep your values front and center as your career evolves? So when it comes to values alignment and a values assessment, you want to make sure that you are reassessing probably every 6 months to at least every year, because so many things can change, right? And your values will shift and change. So that's something that I would put a little reminder in your calendar and do every 6 months, to come back and take that values assessment that I have, so that you can see if you are still aligned or where there might be some misalignment, and then how can you handle that. One of the things that you can do also throughout this process, and this is especially true if you decide to stay in the organization, is keep a little journal or even like a notes, on your phone, like a little notes app section that is around misalignment. And so anytime you feel that, you can jot down some notes. This is such a powerful exercise because, one, you're recognizing when something isn't quite right. And then you're writing it down, so you're getting it out of your head onto paper. But then you can also go back and read it and look at it and ask yourself, is this something that matters to me at my core? Or is this something that is just unique to this situation and happened, but it's not something that's going to impact me long term? So those are things that you want to think about when you're keeping a journal like that. And then something that I think gets overlooked a lot in the career space is boundaries. I want you to think about, what are some of your boundaries that you have in work, or maybe you don't have any boundaries at work and you need to establish some, because a lot of times one of the reasons that we have a misalignment is somebody has stepped into our space in a way that we don't like. Right? So they've approached us the wrong way, or they've done something that really impacts us in a negative way. And so you want to look at that and understand what that is. I'm not going to dive deep into boundaries in this episode, but that's something you can definitely do a little bit more research on your own. If it's something that everybody wants, I can do an episode on it. But it's such a deep topic to talk about related to career that I don't want to spend this whole episode talking about it. But it's definitely something that you want to think about. So one of the things that I want you to keep in mind when it comes to this final stage of habits is that your values can drift very slowly, which is why sometimes we don't always see this coming, right? And these habits that you establish of, writing things down or looking at your values annually, they can help you catch some of this before it turns into any type of career crisis, right? So that's just something that I want you to keep in mind. The habits kind of keep us in check to make sure that we're not going to totally lose it if something is misaligned, okay? And something I want you to ask yourself as you're going through stage 5 is, what habit would help me stay grounded in what matters most? Okay, we have gone through all 5 stages talking about values misalignment. So at this point, you should have some clarity, you should have some goals, and you should be able to take action and look at those habits. But here's the thing. If you've been feeling that low-grade frustration, that disconnect, that sense that your work just doesn't feel right anymore, pay attention to that. I've said this multiple times. Misalignment doesn't always show up with a huge sign telling you that you're in misalignment. Sometimes it is subtle, but over time, it can wear you down. Okay? You don't have to make drastic moves today. And in fact, I don't recommend that ever. Remember, you don't need to burn anything down. So we're not going to just quit our jobs because we're frustrated. But you do need to start naming what is not working. And then from there, you need to reconnect with the values that matter the most to you right now. Okay? Those deal breaker values that you can find out through my values assessment. But this is also what the Control Your Career process helps you do. It gives you structure when you feel out of alignment. And it's a way to get clear on whether change is possible or if it's time to move on from a situation. So if you want more help walking through this process, I've put a worksheet into the show notes that's specific to this season that gives you some areas to outline what I've talked about in this process. You can write your notes and it kind of gives you an overview of each of the 5 stages of the Control Your Career process. So if this episode hit home for you, if you related to it, please subscribe so that you don't miss what is coming next. I would love it if you could share it with a colleague or a friend who's been kind of questioning the culture or maybe just not quite sure why things feel off for them. And then again, make sure you check out my free resources, the Control Your Career worksheet, as well as the values alignment, which will both be linked in the blog post for this episode. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, keep taking control of your career.